This is one of my screams. This is something Gene used to say on a regular basis whenever we worked on one of his proposed projects. He wanted to scream because he had not seen progress in that area. This was not, usually, directed at me, but rather at the focusing community or the world at large for not making enough progress in areas he thought were urgent and essential. At first, when I heard this from Gene, it seemed personal, until I quickly learned that this was one of his idiosyncrasies, to express in seemingly angry terms something that frustrated him in his work. That is a lesson serving me well in many other areas of my life since I worked with Gene. More on screams to follow. Write everything and then... On writing, Gene said, write everything you want to write, and then go back and take out every word you don't absolutely need to make your point. This is wisdom he conveyed to many, not just me, but it has stood me in good stead ever since I first heard him say it. I sometimes wonder if he used this wisdom in his own writing. It seems a heavy responsibility for a philosopher, someone who writes about complex, sometimes obscure, often esoteric topics. I have also noticed that for fiction writers, it is not necessarily the wisdom they should follow. They are writing for mood, sometimes nuance or foreshadowing, sometimes in the idiom of a particular period. I could edit out many unnecessary words, but the spirit, mood, or undercurrent of the piece could be ruined. However, in business writing, research writing, ordinary correspondence, or anything for which understanding on the part of the reader is crucial, this wisdom is pure gold. Your emails are too long. Just write, I want to connect with you. This is something he said to me in considerable frustration about how long it took me to write emails. I wanted to explain why I was connecting when all he wanted was to connect with people now. And he was right. I have employed this wisdom over the years since, and it has helped me make connections easily, quickly, and effectively, where I used to agonize, sometimes for days, weeks, or even months over what to write. Your facts and my facts do not match. I once said to Gene, your facts and my facts do not match, something a coach taught me. Gene expressed astonishment at the simplicity of this and said, if I had known that 20 years ago, relationships could have been entirely different. I was using this concept in interactions about business, but he also applied it to personal relationships, something that had not yet dawned on me. I can assure you, I use it in all relationships now. I do not know if Gene ever used this aphorism again, but I use it all the time and commend it to anyone who needs to find common ground with another person. It honors the notion that we cannot convince another person to abandon falsehoods until we acknowledge that they have as much right to the chokehold they have on what they consider to be facts as we have to our chokehold on what may or may not be verifiable facts. The two processes are different and separate. How tightly I hold my facts versus whether they are verifiable facts needs a different approach to reach forward motion in life. Otherwise, it is a war of opinion which cannot be won, typically, without violence. I give a deep bow to focusing for helping me to learn these truths and figure out what to do about them in my daily life. Gene on the body. Your body is not just your physical body. Much has been written about this. At first, in focusing, as I understand it, the felt sense was sought in the area from throat to pelvic floor, ignoring the limbs and especially the head. This was the way people could most easily learn to be good at felt sensing without getting caught up in their own thinking. Later, Gene wrote, your body is not just your body, as he expanded our understanding of what constitutes the body and where the focuser might locate felt senses. For me, in my work with Gene, the way in which he evolved his thinking was the essence of flexibility and expansion. This helped me in developing my own thinking and understanding of all things focusing, which is to say all things about people, including me. As I have taken what Gene taught me, and all of us, further in my living, I have developed a much more satisfactory relationship with the whole of my body, from thoughts and feelings to sensations to aches and pains to intuitions and insights, as well as new dimensions of spirituality. Gene on personality assessments. One of my keen interests is understanding human personality. Along the way, I studied the Gallup Organization's Strengths Practice and the Myers-Briggs Personality Type Indicator, MBTI. One day, Gene and I found ourselves conversing about the MBTI. He said to me that he did not know much about it and asked if I would explain it. I said that there are 4 dimensions to human personality in this model, each dimension having 2 ends of a continuum. According to MBTI theory, human preferences fall somewhere along each of these 4 continuums. The result of taking an MBTI assessment is a 4-word personality type indicator from one of 16 possibilities. Gene laughed out loud and said something to the effect of, "How can anyone think that they can reduce the human personality to one of 16 boxes?" I think about all the different ways Gene expressed his beliefs, his opinions, and his philosophy about the infinite variety of human expression. His comment about the MBTI makes perfect sense to me. I still find it useful, but with a grain of salt, straight from Gene's pantry. Focusing partnership. In the spring and summer of the year I worked with Gene and Mary, I spent a good many hours with Gene at his home. I have vivid memories of those sessions for several reasons. There was a red chair on the front porch where Gene smoked, wrote, thought, talked, focused, and taught. It was huge, comfortable looking, worn, and his. Being Gene's focusing partner on those occasions, having the master as my listener, and being the listener to the master was extraordinary. His grasp of how it is for me was moving, and his willingness to bring up and out what was in the depths of his being created a unique and unforgettable connection. In one focusing session, there was the topic of my reaction to angry men. My father was the original angry man to whom I became reactive. There were men I was close to, and there were men at work who also evoked this reactivity. Gene turned out to be another. Although, with Gene, I did not take it personally, so much as I had to subdue an ancient reaction. As my focusing partner, Gene masterfully navigated this territory with me. And then he had a way of taking in a focusing revelation like that and remembering it so he could reflect it when it came up in future. He was neither coddling nor critical about such things, only matter of fact, and often to excellent effect. Experienced focusers might be thinking, is that not a violation of protecting the content of the focuser's session? I do not have a definitive answer. In fact, I think I could argue it both ways. For me, this remembering of who I am was profound and deepening of the relationship Gene and I formed. I appreciated it, and I hope I encounter it again. The biggest lesson. Gene and I had a significant disagreement because we each believed a version of the facts that was not entirely accurate. The details of the conflict do not bear retelling, but the resulting method of resolving the conflict is worth sharing. Each of our beliefs about the other contained a grain of accuracy, what could be verified, but the rest of what we each believed was a story about the facts, and a misrepresentation and misinterpretation of both the intentions and the actions of the other. We took a break from our work together when the conflict surfaced. The conflict was too big for either of us to hold and keep working. It was Gene who called to say he wanted to resume our work but did not know how. All I knew was that I wanted some kind of balance in the resolution of the situation. I had too much experience with so-called conflict resolution that produced seemingly endless tirades and accusations. I suggested we limit our exchange to one sentence each. Clarification was acceptable, but no paragraphs. He agreed. It took us many weeks of these exchanges before we came to a mutual understanding that worked for both of us. This method for resolving conflict is something I believe has wider application. So I presented it to the focusing community at the International Focusing Conference in Switzerland in 2013. The identity of my partner in developing the method was not revealed at the time. Since all this happened, I have studied interactive focusing, IF, substantially. I believe what Gene and I did relates to the kind of empathic listening Dr. Janet Klein put forward in IF. I am inspired both by this experience with Gene and by my studies of Klein's work to bring to more people this kind of help for difficult interactions. I am grateful to the organizers of the 2013 International Focusing Conference in Switzerland for allowing me to present these ideas. See Endnote 3. Gene's screams and how the Project for Projects came to be. Weekly conversations might seem like something that would wind down quickly, but that was never the case with Gene. We had a list of projects, and I was to report back each week on anything that transpired on those topics. Gene called these projects his screams. These were ideas he had for how to share focusing more broadly. He wanted them all to become reality. Some of his ideas were workable, while some were not as workable, but might contain seeds that would inspire people to develop more workable models. Gene called the collection of his dreams and screams the Project for Projects. Somehow, being able to talk about the whole thing with this sort of umbrella title gave a structure that he seemed to like. I also think it was his way of identifying what he was working on with me as opposed to what he was working on with others. He was always working on something with someone. When I first began to work with Gene, he had a list of over a dozen projects he wanted me to complete. I did not fully understand at the time the extent to which he believed I was going to be able to accomplish all that, unpaid, with a cadre of unpaid volunteers from the focusing community. I sometimes wonder if I had known then what I know now, especially about the challenges of some of his ideas, whether I would have signed on to work with him at all. In the end, I'm glad I did not know, because what I gained from our time together is priceless. Gene said something like, "I scream and scream about these things, but no one ever does anything." I should call this a wander through Gene's screams, because no matter how many times I write, I am never satisfied that I have sorted it out in a tidy, logical flow. And that, dear reader, is what it was like to work with Eugene Gendlin. Brilliant, sometimes confounding, always inspiring, frequently frustrating, and ultimately life-changing. Gene had many ideas about organizational matters, staffing, marketing, fundraising, social media, outreach, creating a buzz, and more. What he did not seem to have in equal measure was real-world experience running organizations, operations, or projects. Gene was brilliant, no doubt about it. Like others I have known, he thought, he hoped, his ideas would translate into practical application and real-world improvements. What happened in my time with him was a lot of thinking out loud, note-taking, communicating, creative ideation, and a fair amount of project formulation and planning, but little actualization, much less implementation. This frustrated both of us. Him, I believe, because he was in his late 80s and believed that his time was coming to an end. Me, because I like to work on ideas until they are implemented. No one else attended our meetings, so no one else heard what he shared. For that reason, I want to put what I know of Gene's ideas out to the world so that others can seize them and take them to the places Gene and I could not. Now, here they are, Gene's screams, which I have given as much detail as I have. I invite anyone reading this to contact me with any corrections or revisions they would like to recommend. An addendum can be published if enough such commentary appears. Focusing in business. See Endnote 4. Gene had a keen interest in many facets of business. He often talked about several people with whom it seems he had extensive conversations about how focusing could be used in business contexts. By the time I met Gene, I had completed my certification project by teaching focusing to colleagues at my workplace. The results left me divided about the prospects for expansion. On the one hand, all participants rated focusing as a useful tool for personal growth and development. On the other hand, the deeply personal experiences they each had raised concerns for emotional safety in the workplace outside the safe container of our workshop. Gene and I discussed this and concluded that more would need to be done for focusing to establish itself as a workplace tool for things like stress relief, traditional focusing, innovation, TAE, conflict management, IF, and so much more. His conversations with members of his board and the wider community in my time alone fired his imagination about a world in which focusing was the universal tool to teach emotional intelligence and resilience at work. Gene told me repeatedly about discussions he had with a professional focuser in Denmark and an engagement to bring focusing into a large corporation. Did it succeed? At the time of my work with Gene, a member of TFI's board of directors and a close friend of Gene had worked with a large automobile manufacturer using focusing as part of his toolkit. He published an article about his experience and kept Gene informed about his involvement. Gene wanted to use results like these to encourage others to create similar projects anywhere in the world. Gene considered these results success stories and more valuable than academic-style research. We discussed how focusing and TAE could help businesses of all sizes to improve both the emotional intelligence of their teams and to teach innovation, where the idea of teaching that skill was fast becoming mandatory. I believe more has occurred on this topic since I worked with Gene. There is no question of the vital interest businesses should have in emotional intelligence. The days of leave your feelings at the door and trying to be less than a whole person at work should have gone by the wayside. Skills like focusing are vital to the health of employees at all levels. There is a hope that focusing and its related specialties can at least ride the coattails of other mindfulness practices into the workplace, if not forge a path of their own. Another area of interest on the part of business people, where focusing can make an important contribution, is the use of intuition. As recently as the 1990s, the use of intuition in business, the gut feeling, was still suspect. But more recently, with the widespread popularity in all sectors of mindfulness practices, the benefits of listening to one's intuition have become more acknowledged. For these and other reasons, teaching focusing and TAE to business people could be beneficial to both the effectiveness of businesses and the health of their people. Gene said he saw this from the start. I believe much has been done and hope the results are readily available. Mary and Gene met a businessman and focusing trainer from Ecuador who teaches the pause to benefit those who do not have wide access to educational opportunities in his region. It was his combination of both focusing and business experience that fired up Gene's imagination about what could be accomplished with a cadre of people similarly endowed. I believe this work was based on the revolutionary pause addressed by Mary, particularly in her 2003 remarks to that year's International Focusing Conference. Gene mentioned to me many times his wish to clone this man, meaning he wanted to have a growing group of people who combine business acumen with focusing and create similar innovations. I do not know if anything like this has happened, but it is a good illustration of complexity in working with Gene. Focusing and business, revolutionary pause as an entryway to learning at least one focusing skill, connecting with people who have useful skills, focusing for the masses, and more. Creating a buzz about focusing. Gene understood that the term focusing, as it means the practice he developed, had, and still has, a troubled place in the vernacular. He said to me on more than one occasion that focusing did not have to be called focusing. We could call it something meaningful to any audience. But whatever word or words we used should inspire people to embrace the practice. He further believed that a professional public buzz about focusing could cure a lot of ills for TFI and the global focusing community. He never said he had a clue how to do it, although he did offer that calling it focusing was part of the problem, as the word itself has public meanings that confuse the buzz. Since the time we had these conversations, I have observed many offerings that use different, hopefully attractive, language to describe what will be delivered, presumably in the hopes of attracting audiences with the needs that these services, based in focusing, can provide. It raises another in a seemingly endless string of interesting questions. How can one know if focusing has taken hold, generated buzz, or become sticky if it is not called focusing? Does that matter? Gene said he liked the idea of stickiness. This is a concept marketing professionals use to describe the process that makes a product take hold in the minds of the target population. Stickiness is a good thing if what you are selling is beneficial. How to make focusing stick was what he and I were all about. Gene asked an important question, which I will paraphrase here. Where we know focusing will make the whole thing better in any given field, how do we attract, motivate, support, and empower enough people to accomplish the task, especially since we believe we cannot provide anything like adequate compensation, and since the kind of people attracted to focusing often lack the business acumen essential to success? A long-winded question for sure, but it goes straight to the heart of the difficulties of marketing focusing. I encountered several people who espoused the view that marketing was something ethically suspect. Personally, I wonder if the principles, concepts, and practices of marketing eluded at least some of them, and it was easier to challenge the ethics of the profession than it was to dive in, learn more, and apply what one has learned. There is much to be learned, and there are many benefits to running a carefully considered and constructed marketing campaign. Might focusing have thrived more than it does? Gene had a mentality of, if we build it, they will come. Although his version seemed more like, if we tell them about it, they will want to have it for their own. In my opinion, Gene's mentality was not wrong. But for all his creativity, for all he created an entire philosophy and a human development practice unique among the mass of ideas, for all of that, his vision about making focusing stick seemed limited. He had the futuristic ability to see the world differently, with focusing embedded in many environments, but he seemed to become disheartened, even resistant, when talk turned to how to achieve that.